Women's rights are the rights and entitlements claimed for women and girls worldwide. It is the legal, political, and social rights for women equal to those of men. These fundamental rights are implemented by the United Nations for every human being on the planet 70 years ago. These rights include the right to live free from discrimination, violence, and slavery, to own property, to vote, to be educated, and to earn a fair and equal wage. Reproductive rights is an important issue on rights and responsibilities that challenge women to this day. Issues on whether or not political leaders have the power to ban Roe v. Wade or control women's bodies is just one of the many issues we face. Reproductive rights are the legal rights and freedoms relating to the reproduction and reproductive health. They are centered on a woman's ability to make the best choices for their lives, including prenatal services, safe childbirth, access to contraceptives, and access to legal and safe abortion. Margaret Sanger was a pioneering figure in the early birth control movement in the United States, and her work laid the foundation for what would eventually form into the broader reproductive justice movement. Sanger's advocacy was rooted in the belief that women should have control over their own bodies, including the right to access contraception and family planning services. She opened the first birth control clinic in 1916, which was later raided by the police, but her work led to the eventual founding of organizations like Planned Parenthood, which is still commonly used today. Sanger's emphasis was primarily on women's health, especially for working class and immigrant women, though her early views on eugenics and race have been widely criticized. The reproductive justice movement, which emerged in the late 20th century, built on Sanger's groundwork but expanded its focus to include not just access to birth control, but also the broader social, economic, and racial inequities that impact reproductive rights. This is an interview by Mike Wallace of Margaret Sanger, and here she is defending her case on why birth control should be legal, especially since it was heavily looked down upon during this time because of popular religious beliefs.
The Mike Wallace Interview.
Tonight we go after the story of the woman who violated convention and bucked powerful opposition to lead the birth control movement in America. You see her behind me. She's Mrs. Margaret Sanger, who was thrown into jail 8 different times for her efforts. If you're curious to know why Mrs. Sanger has devoted her life to the birth control movement, if you'd like to hear her answer to the charge that birth control is a sin, and if you want to get her views on politics, divorce, and God, we'll go after those stories in just a moment. When the marital relation is so used as to render the fulfillment of its purposes impossible, that is by birth control, it is used unethically and unnaturally. Now, what's wrong with that position?
Well, it's very wrong. It's not normal. It's not, it has a wrong attitude toward marriage, toward love, toward the relationships between men and women.
Well, the natural law, they say, is that, first of all, the primary function of sex in marriage is to beget children. Do you disagree with that?
I disagree with it 100%.
Your feeling is what, then?
My feeling is love and the attraction between men and women. In many cases, the very finest relationship has nothing to do with bearing a child.
Advocates within reproductive justice emphasize the intersectionality of race, class, and gender and argue that true reproductive freedom requires access to healthcare, the ability to parent in safe and supportive environments, and the removal of systematic barriers that disproportionately affect marginalized communities. The theme of rights and responsibilities is extremely relevant to the evolution of the reproductive justice movement, particularly when considering the contributions of Margaret Sanger. Sanger's early advocacy for birth control was centered on the right of women to have control over their own reproductive choices, specifically the right to access contraception and make decisions about when and whether or not to have children. Her efforts were grounded in the belief that women should not only have autonomy over their own bodies, but also the right to determine the course of their lives, including their family size and economic future. However, the right to reproductive freedom comes with significant responsibilities, both for individuals and society. On the individual level, the responsibility includes making informed choices about reproduction, taking into account personal, family, and societal factors. For society, the responsibility extends to ensuring that all women, regardless of race, class, or background, have equal access to reproductive health services and the resources needed to make empowered choices. Sanger's advocacy for birth control, while revolutionary, highlighted the imbalance between those with access to reproductive health care and those without. Her work began to bring attention to the broader societal responsibility to create conditions where reproductive rights were not just available to a privileged few, but to all women, especially marginalized communities. In the context of reproductive justice, the relationship between rights and responsibilities expands even further. It highlights that while individuals have the right to make reproductive choices, society has the responsibility to remove systematic barriers such as economic inequality, racial discrimination, and limited access to healthcare that prevent people from fully exercising those rights. In this way, the theme of rights and responsibilities is not just about individual freedoms, but about collective accountability to ensure that everyone has equal access to the means of securing those rights, therefore achieving true reproductive justice.
The development of women's rights has been a long process, shaped by social, economic, and political movements. Historians describe two waves of feminism in history, the 19th century and the 20th century. The women's suffrage movement started to gain momentum in the 19th century in the United States, the United Kingdom, and other parts of Europe fighting for the right to vote. The first women's rights convention, organized by women, held in Senegal Falls in 1848. This eventually led to the passage of the 19th Amendment, granting women the right to vote. The 20th century had further advancements with the feminist movement of the 1960s and 1970s, which fought for equal pay, reproductive rights, and the end of gender discrimination. Second wave feminism brought attention to issues of domestic violence and marital rape. White feminist voices mostly dominated the narrative of the early days of this movement. The narrative of the second wave of feminism focused on the sexism encountered by the white middle and upper class women, with the absence of Black and other women of color, and the experience of working class women. A major milestone for the United States was the case of Roe v. Wade in 1973, which legalized abortion nationwide and declared women the right to choose. In recent years, there have been both advancements and setbacks on reproductive rights with ongoing debates and legal challenges. Example of this was the recent presidential debate between President Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, where they debated the topic of Roe v. Wade and reproductive rights for women.
Donald Trump hand-selected 3 members of the United States Supreme Court with the intention that they would undo the protections of Roe v. Wade. And they did exactly as he intended. And now in over 20 states, there are Trump abortion bans, which make it criminal for a doctor or nurse to provide health care. In one state, it provides prison for life. Trump abortion bans that make no exception even for rape and incest, which understand what that means.
The development of reproductive rights has made a significant progress, but there are still continuous challenges.
The ability for women to control their reproductive health has been crucial in advancing women's rights. It allowed women to have the choice to delay childbirth, pursue education and career goals, contributing to economic growth. Being able to prevent unwanted pregnancies and spacing births through family planning has been proved to show it reduces health risks associated with childbirth.
Undivided Rights, Women of Color, organized for reproductive justice by Hale Silliman, highlight first-hand experiences of what harsh challenges women have had to endure and face in society, such as racism and sexism. The book also goes in depth on the economic oppression of women as resources were very limited, which shortened their choices and freedom. Many women had to experience low wages and job discrimination, which would lead to unsafe housing, lack of nutrition, and many more disadvantages.
The topic of reproductive justice is important because it goes beyond the traditional view on reproductive rights, addressing the deeper social, economic, and political factors that impact individuals' ability to make informed, free choices about their reproductive health. By confronting the historical legacy of eugenics, forced sterilizations, and racial discrimination in reproductive policies, reproductive justice seeks to repair harm and ensure that marginalized communities, particularly Black, Indigenous, and low-income people, are not left behind. It calls for a society where individual autonomy, community support, and collective responsibility work together to create conditions that allow everyone to exercise their reproductive rights without fear of discrimination or hardship.